Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to be comparing Puzzle Rush Survival on chess.com with Puzzle Streak on lichess. These are equivalent modes where you get infinite puzzles to do in an unlimited amount of time. So if you get stuck during an entire day doing a puzzle, you can just turn off your PC, come back the next day, log back in, and pick up where you left off. First of all, I'm going to talk about the differences in terms of format very quickly. There are a few differences. Which are that on chess.com Puzzle Rush Survival, you do have 3 strikes. So you can get 3 times the puzzles wrong and then you're out. Whereas on lichess, only 1 time and you're eliminated. If you fail 1 puzzle, that's it. However, on lichess, you do have the skip button, so you can choose that as an option if you're not sure about your calculation on a certain puzzle or you're feeling lazy. Then they feed you exactly 1 move and you can try to continue from there. Now, when it comes to the puzzles, I analyzed comparing puzzles number 1, 5, 10, and from 5 and 5, so 15, 20, 25, 30, until puzzle number 50. That's where we stop in this video. Then I will give you my thoughts overall. So let's get to it. This is puzzle number 1 on lichess. Now what we have is a fork with a rook of king and queen. The rook is defended by black's queen and therefore black queen's material. The first puzzle on chess.com involves a simple back rank checkmate. We have this pawn covering these squares, this black pawn occupying this one, and only a useless interposition with the rook. We have this check with the queen, forking king and rook. But the situation is even worse for black, because after king to b8 only move, then there's queen takes rook, but it's also checkmate. It's a back rank checkmate, even simpler than the first one, because now, I mean, this is probably the most classical example of a back rank checkmate, where there are these 3 pawns where the king has castled. So check, takes everything, checkmate. Now the 10th puzzle on lichess has a simple mate in 2. There is queen check supported by the rook. King can only go over here and then gets mated with queen h2. Another back rank checkmate, but in this case a little bit more involved. This is a very useful pattern where the queen goes over here, checking the king and driving it to the corner, so that then it can sacrifice itself on the back rank to deliver the mate, as in the previous examples. Now, puzzle number 15 on lichess is a simple mate in 1. Queen goes over here, grabbing the rook, and it covers the whole back rank and also this important square, so the king cannot escape. On chess.com, however, we have this interesting puzzle where deliver a check to the enemy king with a piece that can be taken 3 different ways, but any of those captures would lead to queen g1 mate, supported by the pawn in the corner. And the only other move that can be played apart from taking this bishop is king takes pawn, which would fail to queen g2 mate. So pawn takes, now queen g1 mate. So here we see knight takes pawn sacrifice with a check that would be a fork of king and queen, so black has no choice but to take the knight if they don't want to be down material. And then white takes this pawn, threatening mate in 1. There is no good defense. Black will have to try and defend with the queen, but after that, there is queen takes pawn check. The rook still covers this file, and therefore the king will try to escape over here, but white can simply pin the queen to the king at that point and win material finally. So it is a very interesting pattern and involves some calculation already. We have this situation where there is the typical 2-bishop checkmate, but in this case with a queen instead of a dark squared bishop. So queen check over here, light squared bishop covers that. This square is unavailable because there's a friendly piece, and there are only useless interpositions with the queen before black gets mated. We have an interesting situation where black can simply push this pawn to promotion, sacrificing the bishop, and the bishop is in turn shielding this pawn from getting captured. So bishop sacrifices itself for the higher cause. Now, if the bishop takes bishop, trying to guard from promotion, then the rook sacks itself, and promotion will happen anyway. Be very careful if you're a beginner facing this situation, that you do have to keep shouldering this king. So the king will try to reach one of these squares so that it can stop the pawn from promoting. If the king can step in front of the pawn, then it's this is a rook pawn. It will be over. There's no maneuver there for black to win. It will be a stalemate. Therefore, it's important to keep shouldering this king so that it can never reach those squares. Shoulder all the way through, and then we're going to be able to push. We have a situation where white is trying to play an intermezzo here. The bishop was twice under attack, therefore black could potentially win a pawn perhaps. And white tried this intermezzo move here, hitting the queen, supported by the bishop, the rook, but this fails. To rook takes bishop, removing the defender of the queen of the rook. And why is that a thing? Because this move actually has a very useful tempo on white's king. There's the threat of back rank checkmate. Something has to be done about that. Therefore, white will not be able to grab the queen and will be down a rook. Here we have a situation where this pawn is pinned to the enemy king, and this bishop controls this diagonal. Therefore, the king is somewhat out of moves. Now, white sacrifices a queen, with queen takes h6 check. There's only one move, which is bishop takes queen, but then rook takes bishop, and again it's checkmate because this pawn is pinned, this is covered. Now white tried to play this move because the queen, black's queen, was completely trapped. So black tries this move, hitting white's queen, and now they are hoping for bishop takes queen, knight takes queen, and black is completely fine. White, however, has a powerful solution to this, where they are winning, which is just knight takes knight, and after queen takes, then rook d1, and the queen remains completely trapped on that new square, because now that the queen moves to this other square, this diagonal is no longer available either. And whoops, I almost played rook d1 first. So yeah, we have an interesting situation where this pawn is hitting white's rook. These two rooks are ready to be forked by white's pawn. However, if white rushes with this fork over here, thinking that after pawn takes rook, they would have pawn takes rook, and threatening the queen and the rook at the same time, might think that wins material, but actually doesn't, because queen takes pawn with check, defending the other rook, and it is simply a trade. Now, instead of that, white can do something a little more precise, much more precise, which is queen b8 check, You may notice there are only useless interpositions, therefore black has to move the king. And after that, there would be pawn takes pawn, which opens this file so that the rook may come in. And if that happens, then black will have to give up queen for the rook. And also after this, then the pawn fork will still be in effect. I mean, will finally be in effect, and that's why the puzzle ends here, probably because there's more than one continuation. Puzzle number 40 on lichess presents us with this situation where the rook is having eyes on this knight, but it is currently defended by a queen. Now, a queen is not a great defender, as we shall see here. Any piece can get a tempo on a queen, so the knight in this case jumps over here, hitting the queen. The queen cannot guard this knight anymore because this square is unavailable. It's occupied by a friendly piece. And this square is, of course, unavailable because it's controlled by the black pawn. The queen cannot try to somehow threaten this knight either, because the knight over here is defended by the queen. Not to mention that after rook takes knight, then the rook will also have eyes on that. Therefore, this is just a free piece. Black is offering a trade of queens. This is a blunder because white has an interesting rook sacrifice here, a winning rook sacrifice with rook h6. And now let's say that black declines the sacrifice, so they go over here. Then there would be a decoy with a rook attracting the king to this back to this open file, and then the queen would come in. There would be this useless interposition to delay the mate. Queen takes, king goes back here, and queen h7 mate. Now the rook over here, the friendly rook, takes away this square from the enemy king, and the white pawn covers f7. So after rook h6, black has no choice but to accept the sacrifice. And after g7 check with a pawn fork, the problem that black is facing is that should they go over here, then pawn promotes, and the only move that can be played is rook takes queen, but the rook was the only defender of this queen, so that's a removal of the defender. That's a little bit more elaborate than usual, but it ends up being a removal of the defender. Then white captures to the queen and is simply up material. Instead of that, after rook h6, pawn takes rook, and the pawn fork, king can go over here. And then you may say, well, what now? Like, if you promote here to a queen with check, then queen takes over there, so that the queen doesn't remain hanging, and that's it, right? But not really, because that move is unfortunately for black illegal. After pawn promotes over here, there's a double check. This queen and this other one are both checking the black king, and even though either one could be taken by this queen, both at the same time would be an impossibility. So king has to take this one, then queen takes queen, and that would be even worse than the other line for black, which is why they go for that one. The move is quite interesting in my opinion. It's queen to h4, threatening checkmate in 1. But now this move looks like it doesn't do much, because black can simply trade the queens, right? And stop the checkmate. Now the problem is that after this, white doesn't have to recapture. Instead, white has this useful intermezzo with rook to c8 check. Now the queen interposition would be completely useless, of course, and so would this other one. Therefore, the king has to go over here. Now, rook takes queen, and now the only move would be bishop h5. Rook takes bishop, and if you do the count at the end, white is up a piece. So that is what happens in this puzzle. This is a queen sacrifice with queen g2, king g2, the only move. And afterwards, there is a double check with knight f4. Now the king has to go back to g1, only move, because the knight covers h3. And after that, then the knight will go to h3 and deliver the checkmate. Like so. The first move is an interesting one. Bishop takes pawn check. So if black decides to decline that sacrifice and go over here, for instance, they are simply losing a queen and a pawn for a bishop, which is, of course, not good. Therefore, they have to take. Now, if they take with a queen, this is an attraction, a decoy, where we have the royal fork. So the queen was attracted to a bad square where it falls victim to this tactic. Instead, if black takes with a king, however, then that is the part that involves a little bit more calculation, perhaps. I mean, it's a little bit harder to see, which is knight check, covering this square. Now, this is controlled by this pawn. This also, this one is occupied by a friendly piece. This one as well, and this one too. So, king has to go here. And then there is queen f3, checkmate. That's the end of the calculation. So they go obviously for the line where they don't get mated. There's the royal fork, and white emerges up a queen. g4 check, a move that is extremely forcing, works here. So there are only two available moves for white, two legal moves, king h4 and pawn takes pawn. Now king h4 fails miserably to rook h2 checkmate. Notice that the knight covers the g5 square, which is something extremely important in the other variation as well. Now, therefore, after g4, then there follows fg4. After that, the pawn vacated this g5 square, therefore the knight can go there. So knight g5 check is the move that follows, and white only has one move, which is king h4. Notice that the g4 square is not only controlled by black, but also occupied by a friendly piece, therefore it is unavailable. Now, after that, the knight reroutes itself to f3, so knight to f3 check. The king has to take on h5, and after rook h2, that is simply checkmate. So the puzzle follows like so. Okay, so final thoughts. I would say the first few puzzles on lichess offer a wider range of patterns, whereas on chess.com you basically have back rank mate over and over again, and queen supported by a friendly piece delivering checkmate to the enemy king. And the hanging piece, a piece that can simply just be taken and snatched in one move. Let's say there's a rook right there and you just have to see that it's there to be taken. However, on chess.com the escalation happens much quicker in terms of difficulty, whereas on lichess it will take a long while before you find something that requires really deep calculation. So if you're looking for that puzzle that will really challenge you, then on Puzzle Rush Survival, you're much more likely to find that earlier than on a lichess streak. This all depends, of course, on what you're looking for. Also, keep in mind that it also depends on your budget, because on chess.com, you do have to pay for a membership, whereas on lichess, the puzzles are completely for free. Personally, I like doing both. I think there's value in what both of these modes offer. And let me know what you think. Which one do you prefer, and why in the comment section. Take care and see you in the next video. Bye.